This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by Energy Hub. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on virtual power plants, or VPPs, my guest is Rusty Haynes, Senior Manager for Research and Industry Strategy with clean energy advocacy group, the Smart Electric Power Alliance, or SEPA. Rusty's going to preview the new report from SEPA and the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, which catalogs and describes the rapid growth of legislative and regulatory policy work on VPPs across the U.S. in 2025. Rusty began his career in policy work in 1999 as a legislative assistant at the North Carolina General Assembly. And then he spent over 12 years helping build North Carolina State University's comprehensive desire database of state energy policies across the country. He then worked with policy analyst let me rephrase that, EQ Research before joining SEPA in 2020. So Rusty, for starters, how do you define a VPP for policy purposes? People have a lot of different definitions, so I'd like to know yours. And what kinds of business models have emerged to bring VPPs to market? The report mentions utility-led and aggregator-led and various models like that. I'm curious to know how you see the spectrum. And as a last part of this question, can you tell us about the growth of policy activity involving VPPs that you cataloged and described in this recent 50 states of virtual power plants and supporting distributed energy resources report that you and North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center put together? So pick it up with the definition, Rusty.
Thanks very much, Herman. You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to mention right up front that a lot of people have very different ideas, different definitions of VPPs. I bet if you put 50 energy nerds in the same room, they would probably come up with 50 different definitions. We generally use the U.S. Department of Energy's definition from a couple of years ago from the Pathway Report, the Liftoff Report. So DOE defines a virtual power plant as an aggregation of distributed energy resources that can balance electrical loads and provide utility scale and utility grade grid services like a traditional power plant. So not a traditional power plant, but like one. I guess I would add to that notably these are real energy resources. The term virtual sometimes is dinged as being not quite accurate. So some folks call these things distributed power plants, which I can appreciate. But regardless, these are real energy resources, distributed energy resources that when combined with magical software can balance energy supply and demand and provide grid services that are very much like what a traditional power plant could do. The report that we authored, that is SEPA authored or co-authored with our friends at the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, this is the 50 states report, takes a similarly broad approach to what a VPP is. So we defined it and we generally stick to DOE's definition. Our report typically covers DERs, not just battery storage, but DERs that can be used in a virtual power plant or can be used to support a virtual power plant. That includes primarily behind the meter storage, of course, the obvious candidate, but also smart thermostats, EVs and EV chargers, as well as smart heat pumps and smart water heaters. Those are technologies that are emerging more recently in the portfolio of VPP technologies we're seeing arising around the country.
And Randy, let me before you go on, and then there's a lot more to answer in that question, but I just want to mention that we're going to have representatives of all of those kinds of technologies on the podcast as we go forward. People that do smart thermostats, people that do other smart appliances, all kinds of things. So stay tuned. But go ahead and continue on with your answer to that, the business models and the growth.
Well, that's great bait, Herman. So I now will need to listen to those podcasts as well. So thanks for the tip. I wasn't aware of that. Glad to hear it. Regarding the models and the program structures, you called out a few, and we call out a few of these in our new report, the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. Regarding, I guess, the primary candidates or the primary manifestations of virtual power plant models and program structures that we're seeing out there, these are, of course, shaped by state policy frameworks and policy priorities. as well as utility and industry innovation. So they do vary, but generally the models include a utility-owned and operated virtual power plant, a utility-led virtual power plant utilizing a third-party platform, third-party operated VPPs, direct VP participation in wholesale markets. More recently, we've seen a new model that is adjacent to or maybe falls under the VPP umbrella. That's called distributed capacity procurement. Has arisen in Minnesota and perhaps another couple states soon.
We're
And then,
going
of
to talk
course,
about that in a few minutes.
oh, wonderful. Okay, great. And then, of course, future iterations. So the wide world of state policy is always evolving and shifting. It's hard to keep up with, but it's a lot of fun and a lot of room for experimentation. So I fully anticipate seeing more than the 4 or 5 I just went through. Maybe it's helpful to take a step back and just ask ourselves why are states doing this? Of course, we all know that U.S. electricity demand is forecasted to rise through the roof over the next several years. ICF is projecting 25% increase by 2030 and nearly 80% by 2050. So that's really putting a fire under states and utilities' feet to balance load growth with flexibility, reliability, affordability. And for that reason, they are feverishly exploring VPPs, as we detail in the report. Of course, VPPs are not the only solution, but they seem to be a very popular solution. Let's see here. I guess I should also observe that part of the motivation as well, it's not just the need to find new energy resources as fast as possible, but Brattle found a couple years ago in 2023 in its study that VPPs can cost or do cost 40 to 60% less than alternative options, and 60 gigawatts of VPPs could save ratepayers between 15 billion and 35 billion over the next decade. That doesn't even include societal benefits, which Brattle calculated as 20 billion. So this is big stuff. Of course, it doesn't mean that VPPs are going to work absolutely everywhere in every state and every utility service territory. And that's where the devil is in the details. And our 58-page report digs into a lot of those details. Let's see, in terms of what we do cover in the report, I'll just blow through this quickly and refer to the report itself for details.
Some numbers and the types of considerations in the policy actions. Is that what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the primary types of policy actions that we cover in the report are behind the meter battery storage and multi-technology VPP programs. So those are more VPP specific. Active managed charging programs for EVs and DR programs that use direct load control. So those are
Demand
kind of the three.
responses. DR programs are demand response. Yeah.
Thank you. Excuse my energy nerdery. Yes, demand response DR. So in terms of numbers, we cataloged 106 different actions, policy actions in 35 different US states and DC. These all took place in calendar year 2025. And the most common type of policy action we saw was a state and utility storage or multi-technology program. 34 of those, roughly a third of the national total. State or utility DR or demand response program, 24 of those, roughly a quarter of the national total, and state or utility EV active managed charging programs, 17 of those. So a lot going on in the states, and it's all cataloged lovingly in great detail in our report. So I encourage folks to check that out.
Yeah, the report has these wonderful color maps that make it easy to grasp exactly how significant this action is. So let me move, Rusty, to the report's notable actions. You had 10 notable actions in 2025 on VPPs. You listed actions that expanded. I want to start with this question, and we'll go to some of the other notable policy actions. But you listed actions that expanded the DER technologies that are in VPs. Like you said, there are different kinds of technologies. So what kinds of technologies were proposed in these policy actions, these legislative or regulatory actions, and what were the outcomes of those efforts to add more technologies? And to what extent did you see VPPs being expanded in a way that could mean more potential for VPPs or more use cases for VPPs?
Great question. And I will admit that it was tough to call out of those 106 or so policy actions of calendar year 2025, which were the 10 most notable.
Yeah,
But we did come up with a top 10 list, which is definitely debatable, and that's a different podcast. But let's see. first thing that comes to mind is Colorado. That's where Xcel Energy had proposed an aggregator VPP program. This is a program a lot of folks are excited about. In December, the commission in Colorado, that is the Public Utilities Commission, approved Xcel's AVPP program. Again, that's aggregator VPP program. That weighs in at 125 megawatts, and it will offer performance-based incentives for distributed energy capacity available to support grid needs. Notably, that program will be, when it's launched, I don't believe it has launched yet. If not, it will be soon.
Yeah.
It will be open to various types of DERs. Again, not just battery storage, but again, this is going to be open to smart thermostats, smart water heaters, smart heat pumps, and EV chargers as well. I'll also add that separate portions of aggregated capacity will be procured by standard offer and through an RFP as well. Maybe a couple footnotes about the program of interest to this audience. This new AVPP program, like I said, primarily will use a standard offer contract with 5 megawatts procured through a competitive solicitation. Notably, front-of-the-meter DERs are not eligible. That's true of most VPP programs. And Xcel, the incumbent utility here, Xcel Energy in Colorado, may not participate as an aggregator for the first 24 months. So that arose, I think, during the settlement discussions. But that program should be launching, I would think, in Q1, if not in Q2. It'd be exciting to see where that lands. Also in the top 10 list, I'll throw Delaware out there. Delaware is not a state many people think belong in a top 10 list, but I will do that anyway. In Delaware, Delmarva Power, one of the large investor-owned utilities there, has proposed its 2027-2029 affordability and load flexibility portfolio. That hit in December, so it's currently under consideration by the commission in Delaware. Delmarva's proposal includes a direct load control program, a BYOB pilot. I will define that as bring your own battery, not bring your own booze. That's a different kind of pilot. A smart charge management program, and interestingly, a locational DR pilot. Again, a locational demand response pilot that would target specific feeders and substations where DR can serve as a non-wires alternative. Again, the commission is currently considering that portfolio of programs with a decision expected in 2026. I will say that the locational DR pilot targets feeders and substations to evaluate that type of approach as an NWA available to customers on targeted feeders. And it basically will provide a bonus for customers who are enrolled in one of the other 3 types of programs.
Hang on just a second, Rusty. That's a really interesting point. I want to stop there. I do want to get on to the next question sooner or later, but I think it's worth stopping there to note these VPPs can serve as what the industry calls a non-wires alternative. What that means is instead of the utility spending money to build a substation or a series of smaller feeder technology infrastructure, which costs in the millions, it's possible to aggregate DER so that and manage them in a way that keeps the load down to what the older infrastructure can handle. The point I want to get here is that saves ratepayers money, and there's a lot of ways that these VPPs, they're already on the system and they're already operating on the system, and so there's a lot less investment in these technology in these VPP aggregated technologies, and that can save everybody who pays electric bills money because they don't have to pay for these expensive upgrades. Am I saying that right? Do you think I'm saying that right, Rusty?
Yeah, absolutely. And affordability is huge here. And again, I'm going to go back to the Brattle report from 2023, which found that, these VPPs, if scaled, can save not just utilities, but we're talking about ratepayers here who would be paying for this stuff otherwise between 15 billion and 35 billion over 10 years. That's huge. And it really aligns with the point you just made here. And that's one example of how all that money would be saved.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Ryan Hledick of Brattle because I know he really brought that to the headlines a few years back with that report. You want to mention any more of these in terms of added DER technologies before we move on to the next question, Rusty?
Let me just mention Illinois. That's also huge, and
Yeah.
I'm going to cheat here
Yeah.
because Senate Bill 25, that's the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act, That was actually passed. It went through both houses of the legislature in December, but it wasn't signed into law by the governor until January. So I'm
Yeah.
cheating and getting ahead of ourselves with our calendar year 25 report, but it's a huge deal. That was another, I believe, 1,000-page bill following on the heels of the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which was also 1,000 pages. Illinois loves its 1,000-page bills, is the lesson here. But that basically is going to create something to the tune of 2 new VPP programs and a lot of opportunities for the industry there. So one of those is focused on battery storage, and another new VPP program arising from SB Senate Bill 25 in Illinois will take the form of a tariff offering. It will allow customers with battery storage, non-battery energy storage, here we go with newer technologies again, and EVs to enroll via aggregators or directly through the utility, in this case, ComEd or Ameren, I believe. And
Yeah.
utilities must propose their tariffs by end of year next year with ICC or commission approval by end of the following calendar year. So huge deal in Illinois, and hats off to anybody who can keep up with all the work that's going on in that state.
Yeah.
Incidentally, oh, sorry, Herman, I was just going to add that new law also established a 3 gigawatt energy storage target by 2030. So these things all kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, they're just doing remarkable work in Illinois. And we're going to have at least 2 representatives from Illinois, one from ComEd and one from Vote Solar, who are going to talk about how they got that done. Um, and one of those VPPs is going into service this spring. So we're going to get some real important feedback on the performance of VPPs, big VPPs, serving utilities coming as soon as the end of this year. Here's a quick note from the sponsor of our series of podcasts about virtual power plants, Energy Hub. What if everyday devices had the potential to strengthen the grid when it's needed most? Energy Hub helps utilities turn that potential into dependable capacity by coordinating thermostats, EVs, batteries, and other devices so they work together as virtual power plants or VPPs that respond to grid needs in near real time. Energy Hub's latest white paper lays out a maturity model for VPPs that can be planned and dispatched with the same confidence as conventional plants while being 40 to 60% less expensive to build. That's why more than 160 utilities across North America partner with Energy Hub to manage over 2.5 million devices that provide 3.4 gigawatts of flexible capacity. Read the white paper and discover what VPPs can do for your grid at energyhub.com. Okay, let me move on to the next question, Rusty. You found in some places VPPs were part of utility planning processes. That's a big deal because when you get something into utility planning processes, it gets a chance to move over into the operations processes. And VPPs are new, so it's important to get them moving through utility systems. You also found in other places that there's a new emphasis on customer-owned batteries to meet specifically capacity needs for when peaks happen that the utility wasn't fully prepared to meet. These are 2 very important new innovations in using VPPs, not brand new, but still not proven and accepted. So tell me, how did those potentially important changes go? What were the outcomes? What were the results? And how do you think those are going to affect these crucial things, reliability and affordability that everybody's talking about these days?
Good question. I'll start with Georgia, my home state. Georgia has one investor in utility, that's Georgia Power. I believe they have a triennial IRP process, and Georgia Power has a knack for injecting different ideas into its IRPs that don't seem to occur in other states. So in that sense, it's been pretty innovative in terms of experimenting with customer programs, battery storage, community solar, et cetera there. Regardless, in July, the commission in Georgia, the Georgia Public Service Commission, approved Georgia Power's 2025 IRP. That covers a 20-year period, even though the IRP is dealt with again every 3 years. But this new 2025 IRP approved in July by the commission includes a new 50 megawatt customer side solar plus storage pilot program. So that's paired solar with storage. And interestingly, this is what I actually like to see out of investor in utilities, where they take 2 cohorts and they divide a program in 2 and try 2 different approaches to what they're trying to achieve and see which one works better in theory. and then move forward with that version. Regardless, Georgia Power's new program will include a 25 megawatt customer directed component that involves load curtailment with performance based payments. And it will also include a 25 megawatt utility directed component by Georgia Power itself, which involves continuous operation for an upfront incentive. It's reminiscent of what we see here where I live in North Carolina, Duke Energy and its Power Pair program, but seems to be on a larger scale. And as a footnote to that, Georgia Power will be deploying a DERMS, another acronym, so I'll define that if I can remember what the 50 letters mean. Distributed
Distributed
Energy
energy
Resource
resource.
Management System.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Finally got around to memorizing that. And so Georgia Power through DERMS will manage the devices that are participating in that program. Let me move up the coast to Connecticut. In Connecticut, PURA, which is the state regulatory authority there, in December approved modifications to the state's energy storage solutions program. That is a whopping 9-year program launched in 2022, administered by both the Connecticut Green Bank and the two IOUs. That's Eversource and United Illuminated in Connecticut. PURA's decision in December adopts an alternative performance-based incentive model that focuses on active dispatch due to, interestingly, low compliance from participants using the previous passive dispatch option. So they ditched the passive dispatch option or going only with active dispatch. PURA tinkered with incentive levels, of course, and also scrapped a previous 5 megawatt system limit. Incidentally, Connecticut does have a statewide energy storage target of 1,000 megawatts. That's 1 gigawatt by 2030. So I assume that that's part of the equation there. Let's see. In terms of, do we have time for one more state, Herman?
Yeah, one more, but before we leave Connecticut, I got to give a shout out to Marissa Gillette, former chair of the Connecticut Public Utilities Commission, who has pushed through some of the most interesting new options in regulation of any place in the United States. Tiny little Connecticut. Go, Marissa. Go ahead, Rusty.
Thanks, Herman. Then we'll, I guess, swoop down to Louisiana. That's another state you don't hear a lot arising from in terms of DERs and clean energy and so on, being very fossil fuel heavy and having super cheap electricity. But there, Entergy Louisiana and Entergy New Orleans, those are two different investor-owned utilities. The former regulated by the state, and the latter regulated, interestingly, by the city of New Orleans. That's a very odd arrangement for an investor-owned utility. Regardless,
Yeah.
they've each proposed different suites of DR programs. That was one of the trends we found in a report, or that is that utilities are coming to the table proposing different suites of demand response programs or demand flexibility programs. The New Orleans City Council approved Energy New Orleans' suite of demand response / demand flex for programs in December. So those will get launched up and running soon. And I'd like to call out Entergy Louisiana. That's the state regulated utility for its proposed program suite. These have not been quite approved yet, so they're still pending approval at the commission. Those programs total 81 million from 2026 to 2030. It's a 5-year span. Residential programs, 3 proposed, include behind the meter battery storage, smart thermostat, and behavioral EV charging. Interestingly, commercial and industrial programs include new aggregated capacity. That's a DR program with seasonal incentives to customers that reduce load during events. Customers could use direct load control, manual response, or behind the meter assets. Resources must be dispatchable. And on top of that, Entergy Louisiana has proposed something especially interesting, which is in essence a performance incentive mechanism. That's how shall we say, a nerdy regulatory term that basically incentivizes a utility to do something. In this case, it will incentivize Entergy Louisiana with tiered annual, that is payments for reaching tiered annual targets, rising to 150 megawatts of demand response in the 5th year
Wow.
of that program. So again, pending
Wow.
before the commission. We'll see how that plays out. But that's interesting stuff coming out of Louisiana, both at the state and city level in New Orleans.
Yeah, at a higher level, it shows something else. Entergy is a terrific company, very, very well run. I don't mean to disparage it in any way, but it has been somewhat conservative in adapting newer technologies in my 20 years in this field, and yet here they are recognizing the value of VPPs in a very important way. Last question, Rusty. We don't have a whole lot of time. Let's go over this. There's a debate in Minnesota. Xcel Minnesota has proposed something called, you mentioned it earlier, distributed capacity procurement, or DCP, that uses utility-owned distribution system located megawatt scale front of the meter batteries as a VPP. There are a lot of advocates in Minnesota opposing this, or questioning. I shouldn't say opposing so much as questioning this idea, because they want VPPs to be these competitively procured, aggregator-led, customer-owned DER aggregations. Um, can you tell us a little bit, just a little bit, like I say, we don't have a whole lot of time, about the background of this debate uh, over competitive versus utility? And I'd just like to get your impression of where, who's right, who's wrong, where do you stand on this debate?
Great questions. Let's see. Just a little bit of context here. In October, Excel Energy in Minnesota came to the table at the commission and proposed what it's calling the Capacity Connect program. That's the DCP model that Herman described. That's actually phase two of its initiative. Phase one focused on R&D. Phase two is the actual program. That program, as proposed, would deploy between 50 and 200 megawatts of, as Herman mentioned, front of the meter, notably front of the meter, utility owned and operated battery storage with systems ranging from 1 to 3 megawatts by the end of 2028, as well as a limited DERMS to support that program. Program budget weighing in at 152 million to 430 million. And costs would be recovered through a rider from ratepayers. There are a lot of pros and a lot of cons, a lot of benefits, a lot of criticism. And I think this proposal, more than anything I've seen recently, really just kind of encapsulates the old tug of war between utilities and installers and ownership and all of those things. The proposal definitely has some merits, but depending on your perspective and your own business and business interests, you either love it or you don't love it. There is a lot of gray area, though. But just quickly, benefits of this, I think Excel is making the case that this is scalable. It's a new a new source of firm dispatchable energy. It will help meet load growth, which we need, of course. It will be very strategically deployed because Excel knows where it will be best deployed, be very precise. Of course, there are no trust issues according to Excel because safety, cybersecurity, and so on will be met since Excel itself would be doing this. The hosts, by the way, would receive incentives, so they can't get backup power from this stuff because the storage assets will be in front of the meter. So hosts only receive basically incentives in the form of payments directly to them, but not based on the performance of the system. And the criticism is equally vibrant, shall we say. Commonly, folks who are on the other side of the coin say that this might be pricier than other options. In my opinion, that's true of a lot of pilots. So we'll have to see where the dust settles wherever this gets, if this gets scaled, that is, and goes forward. Again, this is still pending before the commission. Critics say it shifts risk to ratepayers. It restricts market competition. It seems to be slower to roll out than a third-party equivalent. There's no data transparency, either grid data or customer data, and alternative models, which might be cheaper and faster, aren't adequately explored. Of course, it's funded by ratepayers, et cetera, et cetera. So this is somewhere where I feel like I land right in the middle personally. I don't quite know which side I fall on. I like both sides and both arguments. I think they're all valid, to be honest. I applaud the innovation. I applaud industry leadership, especially coming from utilities. I don't have a strong personal opinion on where this should go, but I'll love to see where it lands and how it fares if it does go forward. Of course, this has a strong flavor of who should be able to own what and who shouldn't be able to own what. Or maybe there can be some kind of joint custody arrangement, shall we say, where the utility does some and the developers do some. But this is the proposal currently, and I think in my mind it all kind of boils down to net benefits. That means grid value and ratepayer value, as well as speed and the ability to scale this thing if it does look like it's going to work out.
Okay, I think we can leave it there. I do want to tell you and our listeners, we're recording this on February 18. I'm not sure when the commission is going to render its ruling, although I heard rumors that it's going to be sooner rather than later and may have already been rendered by the time this podcast drops. What will be true by the time this podcast drops is that anybody that listens and also reads my work will know that I've already committed myself on this And it happens to be exactly what Rusty said. These are early days in VPPs. It's not beginning, but we need to, we're going to need, the power system is going to need all it can get in the next few years. And so it's an excellent time to try out these different business models. And I just couldn't find, after talking to people on both sides of this debate, I couldn't find any reason that they shouldn't try both forms of VPPs to see how each works. So we'll know what is best going forward. But that's all I'm going to say. That's my editorializing. I want to thank my guest. Great conversation with Rusty Haynes, Senior Manager for Research and Industry Strategy with SEPA, detailing a new report, the new 2026 version of the report that's cataloging and describing the growth of legislative and regulatory policy work on VPPs across the United States in 2025. As always, I also want to thank our sponsor, Energy Hub, and of course, our listeners for taking the time to check out USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.